Good morning, Fair Oaks. I can't hear you. Me said, good morning. Oh, that's much better. I'm your storyteller, Ida, and I come from Jamaica, the beautiful island Jamaica, and I'm going to tell you an oral storytelling today. This story is about Anansi. You know Anansi. You have lots of books about Anansi, like this one, Anansi and the Moss Cover Rock, but I'm going to tell you a story about Anansi and Mrs. Dove. Now, Anansi, sometimes he's a man, and sometimes he's one great big spider. But guess what? Him always bad. Him always trying to play a trick on somebody. So one day, Anansi heard something over by the fence near his house. On the other side lived a witch, and her name was Five. Yes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, her name was Five, and she couldn't stand her name. She wanted a common name like Rosemary, Lisa, Anna, name like that. So she couldn't stand her name. So you know what she do? She made a wicked spell. And she stir a pot and she says, anybody that says the name Five is going to tumble dead on the ground. And Nancy heard this and him say, I can use this for my benefit. So early the next morning, and Nancy go by the road where the people go to and fro for the market. And he set up 5 yam heaps. 1, 2, 3, 4, and him wait. Then along came Mrs. Rabbit. Hippity hoppity Mrs. Rabbit come down the road. Good morning, Mrs. Rabbit, says Anansi. Good morning, Anansi, says nice Mrs. Rabbit. Oh, Mrs. Rabbit, me such a silly little fella. Me can't count me arm heaps. Me such a silly fella. Please, can you help me count me arm heaps? And so nice Mrs. Rabbit counted the yam heaps. She counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the minute she says 5, she tumbled dead on the ground. And do you know what Anansi do? Him gobble her all up. And do you think Anansi saved one piece of food for him starving wife and children? Oh no. He ate it all for himself. And Nancy, he was feeling so good, and he wanted some more. So he waited, and then along came Mrs. Duck. Nice, kind Mrs. Duck. Good morning, Mrs. Duck, said Anansi. Good morning, Anansi, says Mrs. Duck. Oh, Mrs. Duck, me such a silly little fella. Me have all these yam heaps and me can't count me yam heaps. Can you please count me yam heaps for me? Oh, Anansi, I will certainly help you count your yam heaps for you. So Mrs. Duck counts the yam heaps. She counts 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the minute she says 5, she tumbled dead on the ground. And you know what Anansi do? Gobbled her all up. And do you think him save one scrap of duck from starving wife and children? Oh no. He ate it all for himself. Oh, by this time Anansi's tummy is nice and full and lovely. But he still wanted more. So he waited until afternoon for someone else to come down the road. So who comes down the road? Mrs. Dove. Kind, nice, and smart Mrs. Dove. Come down the road. Good afternoon, Mrs. Dove. Good afternoon, Anansi. Oh, Mrs. Dove, me such a silly little fella. Me have all these yam heaps here and me can't count me yam heaps. Mrs. Dove, could you please count me yam heaps for me? So, you know what Mrs. Dove do? She sat on one of the yam heaps and she began to count. She counted 1, 2, 3, 4, and the one I'm sitting on. And Anansi, him is puzzled. He said, "Me think you count them wrong. You must count them again." "Oh, I'm sorry, Nancy. I will count them again." She counted. You want to count with me? Count with me. 1, 2, 3, 4, and the one I'm sitting on. "Mrs. Dove, you count them wrong. You must count them again." Oh, I'm so sorry. I will count it nice and slow this time. So she counted again. 1, 2, 3, 4, and the one I'm sitting on. Boy, by this time, Anansi's so furious. He said, "No, man, no, you count them all wrong. Move out the way, woman. Let me count them for you. You count like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the minute Anansi says 5, him tumbled dead on the ground. See, Anansi, him always trying to trick somebody, but in the end, he is the one that gets tricked. So that is the story of Anansi and Mrs. Dove.